I live far better in the Philippines than I ever did in Australia, and I'm going to explain why. Many people that go and visit Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, as well as the Philippines, if they're from the West, would notice that the level of development is totally different. Most of the time, someone that is not familiar with traveling will go to one of these countries. They might enjoy it a little bit, but they'll notice that the level of quality when it comes to the cleanliness, the traffic, the pollution, and little bits and pieces like that are significantly different to what they get back home. And so most people believe that when they go to these countries, they're not as good as the West. But I'm here to tell you that in the Philippines, I live far better than I ever did in Australia. One of the really big reasons why I moved to the Philippines and why I travel around Southeast Asia in general is because as a business owner, especially an Australian business owner, it's incredibly risky and difficult to hire people from Australia when you're building your company. Because when you first start your company, you don't really know if it's going to succeed or not. And hiring people is a massive risk. So to begin with, you have to do everything yourself. And if you're doing everything yourself, it's really difficult to grow your company. So when I was in Australia, I sat down and I worked out that if I go to a different country and I can reduce my living costs and also hire people from that country remotely, I'm able to significantly scale my company than if I was to stay in Australia. Because staying in Australia meant I would have to pay a lot of money in rent, even if I lived in a place that wasn't very nice or in a neighborhood that was considered cheap. It still costs a lot of money in Australia to live. I mean, the living costs are outrageous at the moment. The alternative to that is going to Southeast Asia or the Philippines, where you can pay the same amount of money, if not less, and live somewhere in far more luxury. I'm talking about living in an apartment building on the 40th level with nice interior furniture, beautiful view of the city, and it has all the amenities that you need. A working gym, a pool, sauna, workspace, you name it. You're never going to get something like that for the same price that you would pay in Australia. It will be triple the price in Australia at best. And so I thought, if I'm going to build a business, then I may as well reduce my living costs, but also have the same quality of life in Asia. Because although there's a lot of pollution and there's a lot of traffic, and some streets are not as clean in some countries as in the West, the cost of living is lower and the quality of living can be equally as good, if not better, than in the West. And because I'm able to reduce my living costs, it means I have more money to invest into staff and contractors who can help me grow my company. They can deliver the services. It means I can take on more clients, I can have more customers, and ultimately grow my business. And so I live far better that way. Now that's one of the main reasons why I moved to the Philippines. Because all my contractors, all of my staff, they come from the Philippines. It makes sense for me to be there. Another reason why I live better in the Philippines than I do in Australia is because of the food economy. Because it's cheaper to eat out. I can eat out almost every day, 3 times a day, and it's going to cost me about as much money as it would cost me to eat out in Australia for one dinner. Now that might not be for everyone, but I know in Australia most people don't eat out every day. Most people will go to the grocery store, they'll buy their food for the week, they'll eat in, they'll stay home, and maybe occasionally they'll go out for dinner. Just because of the amount of money it costs for you to go out. I went there recently for Christmas over the holidays and I was amazed at how expensive it was just to go to the pub for a chicken palmy. Whereas in Philippines, you can go out for breakfast, lunch and dinner and you can actually enjoy your life whilst you're there building your business and scaling it. Now there's obviously a lot of other reasons as well. The weather in the Philippines is fantastic. You can go all around the country, it's tropical weather, it's not horribly hot like in some places in Australia. The beaches are divine, amazing water, crystal clear depending on where you go, and mostly untouched. So if I want to move away from the city, if I want to get away for the weekend to one of these luxurious island resorts, I can go and do that. And again, the cost to go there is far cheaper than if I was to travel to a luxury resort within Australia. Just from my experience living in Western Australia, to go from Perth to Broome is more costly than it is to go from Perth to Bali. Now, I'm sure some people are going to argue with me in the comments and explain why, but regardless of the reason, it's more expensive to travel within Australia than it is to travel from Australia to Asia. And the Philippines is a big country. It might look small on a map, but there's a lot of islands and you can travel from wherever you're living, let's say Manila, to any one of these islands and you can go there for the weekend and it's not going to cost you a fortune. You also have great customer service. That's another big reason why I live better in the Philippines. I'm going to reference Nomad Capitalist where he says, go where you're treated best. Now, in Western Australia, there's almost zero customer service. You can go to a pub, you can go to a restaurant, and they're just going to place the food down on the table next to you without so much as a smile. At least in the Philippines and Asia in general, you can go out for a meal, and not only is the food good, but you also get good service. You're treated with respect. You're treated like a customer, like you actually mean something to them, like they actually want you to be there. In Australia, at least in Perth, from my recent experience, you don't feel like that at all. And one of the big benefits of going out for food is not just the food, but also the customer service, the treatment that you get. And that leads me to my next point. The culture, the vibe, the happiness and the joy of the people, particularly in the Philippines, is also another big reason why I live far better in the Philippines than I do in Australia. It doesn't matter where I go in the country, people are always interested in speaking to me. They want to network, they want to do business. They're looking for ways to climb to the top, and I love that. But they're very humble in doing so. Not everyone is a business owner, of course, not everyone is an entrepreneur, but everyone wants to know who you are, everyone wants to be polite, everyone's friendly, and there's a lot of respect and manners. Something that we're lacking a lot in the West. Now, of course, like any country you go to, there's bad people. There can be crime. And the Philippines is known to have a lot of crime. But if you stay away from those areas, if you keep your head up and know where you're going and who you're speaking to, then you can mostly avoid it. It's also very easy for you to get things in the Philippines. I find that in Australia, if you want to get something done, it can be a bit of a hassle sometimes. Most people feel like they should be paid more money for the jobs that they're doing. Most people feel like if they put in the smallest amount of effort, that it's enough. But in the Philippines, people will go above and beyond for you. If there's a little something extra you need, they will try and get that for you. If you're living in an apartment building and you need something specific, you can ask the guards, you can ask the building managers, you can ask your host, whatever it is, and they'll typically go out of their way to try and help you. In Australia, that doesn't really happen so much. I also know that in the Philippines, you get access to things like nannies for much cheaper than you would in Australia. In Australia, it costs you about $150 per day to send your children to daycare. In the Philippines, most people don't send their children to daycare. They'll get a live-in nanny instead. So they'll have someone come and stay at their home or come to their home each day to look after the kids. It's cheaper to have this live-in nanny than it is to send your kids to daycare in Australia, where they might be taught things that you don't want them to be taught. At least if you have your own nanny in the Philippines, you know what they're being taught. You know what they're being influenced by. You don't have very much control over that if you send your kids to daycare in Australia. Now, I don't have any kids at the moment, and I don't plan to have them for a few years. But I know that when I do eventually have kids, it will be far easier to bring them up in a place like the Philippines, or really anywhere in Southeast Asia, than it would in Australia. Not only will it be cheaper, but I have more control over what they're being taught, what they're being influenced by, and that whole process. Now, I know that Philippines is a developing country, and a lot of people will argue against what I've been saying in this video. There'll be many people that will say that Philippines isn't great. There's heaps of traffic, which I'd agree. It takes ages to go between cities within Metro Manila. The pollution is out of this world. The buildings are old. The infrastructure looks dreary and grey. A city like Metro Manila doesn't get enough sun. Sometimes it can be slow paced, and little things like the postal service don't always work as they should. But if you can put all those little things behind you, you'll actually realise that the quality of life that you get in Southeast Asia and in the Philippines in particular is much better than you might get in the West. And let's not forget that the country is developing. That means it's always going to get better. Countries like the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, these countries can look at what the West is doing right and what the West is doing wrong, and they can make improvements as they develop. Over the next 10 years, the Philippines is going to be a totally different country. The way it is today is going to look completely different. There's so much construction happening. The government are really trying to do their best to improve the country and to improve the quality of living for millions of people. So if you're building a business, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're looking to be location independent, think about going to the Philippines. Not only will you be able to lower your living costs, you'll actually be able to enjoy your life whilst building your business. If you've got a different opinion, let me know in the comments below. Like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.